And I think the last talk, as Tobin said, was a great segue into this because the last speaker highlighted that data is maybe one of the probably the most important thing navigating all of the new capabilities in AI, especially when it comes to foundation models and language models. So we're going to talk a little bit about this project, which Tobin is now involved in, as well as a number of other MIT students, and also students from other academic organizations, from nonprofits, from companies, and legal organizations that all came together to work on an initiative to help source quality data and figure out what data is maybe legally and ethically permissible to use for everyone that's trying to build their own language models. And so this talk will quickly cover what and why data provenance, why does it matter? We'll hope to convince you of that in the next 2 minutes. What did we actually do? What did we build for developers? And then what did we find from the insights and the audit that we conducted? So starting, what and why data provenance? So December 2023 was a very big month for data and AI, and it came with 3 sort of scandals that happened. And the most notable one is probably the one at the bottom, you know, that New York Times is suing OpenAI and Microsoft for alleged copyright infringement by training on New York Times data as well as a lot of other data. But there are 2 other headlines that caught the news. The first one on the 18th, OpenAI publicly suspended ByteDance, the creator of TikTok's OpenAI account, because they were allegedly using OpenAI ChatGPT models to synthetically generate data to train their own competing model. Now, this is actually pretty common. There are probably hundreds of companies doing this, and it is a bit of a legal debate. And the second point is that one of the most common text-to-image data sets out there, Lion 5B, was found to have thousands of images that were completely inappropriate, and it was subsequently taken off of major repositories, and it was a huge scandal for stability and other models that were trained on this. That has led to a lot of controversy. So these are 3 examples that illustrate legal and ethical tensions in the data that everybody is using to train their models. But there are many concerns with respect to where your data comes from. So there are many concerns on your left-hand side here, aside from terms of use, non-consensual graphic data, and copyright that go into deciding whether a data set is right for your use. And right now, for many of these, we're not seeing that there's enough infrastructure documentation on the web to provide this information, even if someone wants to do the right thing, whatever that is going to be determined by lawyers and courts and legislation. And one example, although we love Hugging Face, this is their logo. It's a huge repository of data sets that is used by most of the language modeling community. We see that 65% of the licenses on Hugging Face, because they're crowdsourced, are just incorrect. And that can be misleading. And why does that happen? It's because researchers come and they add new data sets, and they're not lawyers. They just slap a license on top of the old one, or they misinterpret a previous license, or they just omit it altogether. And the result of this is that many people end up training models on this data, and that can be an expensive process requiring thousands, millions of dollars to compute in some cases. And after they've trained the model, you can't exactly unlearn this information. That's a very difficult process. And they could get caught out later when they find that they've trained on data that is controversial in some way. So we believe that we're facing a crisis in data understanding, provenance, and transparency. And we sort of embarked on a mission with all our collaborators to go and trace the provenance of data from its origin for many of the most popular data sets that are out there. So we're looking at text data sets that are for instruction fine-tuning or preference learning, if you're familiar with those. And we start by looking at the original sources of the text, whether that be Wikipedia, other machines, humans who literally wrote it down, Reddit, New York Times, whatever it might be. Those were constructed into data sets by previous researchers and organizations. And nowadays, people collate those into huge collections. But normally, the only information that you get by the time you get to the huge collection is, here are the languages that the text represents, and here's the composition of tasks, and maybe here's how many examples we have. And then they cite this previous work, and you have to go dig that up if you want to know really where that data came from, what legal or ethical considerations might be in it, and so forth. So we look at this full lineage, and we try to fill in the blanks, the licenses, the institutions that created all along that trajectory, the original text sources, whether it's machine generated, human annotated, and at what stage, the metrics about the text, the domains and topics represents, the time of collection, links to all the different places it's aggregated, as well as popularity metrics like citation and download counts. And so we did this with a small army of grad students, because often this involves reading technical papers from a decade or 2 decades ago and deciphering exactly what they did in constructing these now popular data sets. And so we trace this provenance lineage all the way back, and we believe this is the largest empirical analysis in AI of supervised text data sets, their licenses, and their original provenance that is looked at in detail. And then we built a tool over these 2,000 something data sets that helps practitioners navigate all the different features we just talked about that we annotated. So maybe you want to filter for this subset of licenses or data that's for these topics or in these languages. And we build existing tooling on top of repositories like Hugging Face that maybe don't have all of these features or don't have it to the same accuracy. And so this tool is meant for, and you can go to it right now, it's at dataprovenance.org. It's meant for model developers and startups that are looking to source data that fits their ethical and legal requirements, whatever those may be, whatever the jurisdiction they might be in. They all have different requirements, and so we want them to be able to select the subsets of licenses that matter to them. It's also useful for researchers like us to uncover patterns and biases that are in this data in an empirical way. And it's useful for data creators who want to see what are among all these thousands of data sets, where did our data appear and who's using it. And so here's a little preview of our tool. You can go to the website, but you select all these different criteria you might have, and then you can look at the linguistic and global representation of that data, different metrics, what tasks are represented, who created it, all that good stuff. So one finding that was kind of cool, we all know that the data on the web is very skewed to English and to Western-centric cultures. Even though these tools are used fairly globally, they're meant or intended for global audiences in the long run. And so we're able to empirically measure across these thousands of data sets what is the language representation by country. But that's been done a little bit before, but the thing that hasn't been done is looking at who actually are the organizations that collated and created the data set objects. And when we look at that, it's far starker than the linguistic representation. Compare them and see that the contrast is very stark. And so we empirically can measure and see to what extent a global minority is driving the creation of data sets that affect all of our models. And this is important because if we want to improve or change, we now have the ability to measure that. There are a whole bunch of other things that we measured that you can check out in the tool or ask me after. Feel free to try it yourself if you're interested. And a couple other interesting takeaways. How accurate is the public licensing information from the repositories that people use? Not very accurate at all. We improved that significantly with legally guided process to actually label these data sets. What's available by license type? We actually did the first sort of large legal audit of how the AI community is adopting software licenses for the most part to govern the data sets that they're building. Some are permissive, some are less permissive, some are permissive, but maybe they didn't have the right to slap a license on it. It gets very complicated. And interestingly, if we look over time, increasingly in 2023, compared to prior years, we see in red a much thicker block or percent of data sets that are non-commercial in how they're licensed. And so while the community used to be more open in how at least they were licensing these data sets, there seems to be more governance and restrictions now, which could be good in some cases, but can also harm the community of researchers that are trying to build an open infrastructure models. So just to wrap up, what's next? We got some great coverage from the Washington Post, VentureBeat, IEEE Spectrum, and other places. We now have about 40 to 50 contributors from around the world helping us to expand this. And we're extending this analysis and audit and tooling into vision data sets, speech data sets, and pre-training corpora. And thank you very much.